Confucianism is a belief system that fits in the same box as Christianity and Buddhism. Hello, everyone. This is Mark Peterson. Today, I am at the Korea Society, and we are going to cut several short videos introducing important topics that we hope classroom teachers can use in their classroom instruction. And our first video today, we're going to talk about Confucianism, and I have with me as my guest today. Are you my guest or am I your guest?
We're one another's guests.
This is Linda Tobish, who we all know and love as Toby. Yeah. Toby is a senior advisor here at the Korea Society, working primarily on education. And let's do a thing on Confucianism.
I would love to.
And let's hope that a classroom teacher can find some good use for this. Confucianism before Confucianism.
Ah, okay.
And what I'm talking about is two phases of Confucianism in Korea, where we tend to think of Confucianism as what we've known most recently in Korean history. And that's a Confucianism that became the way it was in the late 17th century. And what it became was a patrilineal kind of Confucianism. By patrilineal, I mean the Korean word puge sahwe, which means the father's line, which means the male dominance, which is the issue that gives heartburn to women about Confucianism. And what I've been trying to say is that there's a Confucianism before that Confucianism, and the earlier Confucianism before patrilineal Confucianism was much more egalitarian. It was a Confucianism that existed in a society where daughters had equal inheritance with sons, where daughters participated equally in inheritance rights, where marriage could be at the wife's house or at the husband's house. So it was a much more balanced kind of Confucianism. And my saying that Confucianism can exist in Korea is looking at this earlier Confucianism. So the pre-Confucian Confucianism.
So the pre-Confucian Confucianism, why did it change? Why did it become patrilineal?
Why did it become patrilineal? I think there were two forces that came together. One was they'd been studying these texts, Confucian texts, that had been jacked up with a Neo-Confucian ideology that was pushing more of a male line. Confucianism has always talked about the males, the eldest son doing the ceremonies, but Korea ignored all of that. And they had everybody doing the ceremonies, taking turns. But the text said the oldest son. So eventually the text came to bear down and say, well, we've got to do it this way. And I think another force that came to play was population pressure. When you have greater population, you've got to be more careful about how you divide your property. And Korea came to the point where they thought, we just can't keep dividing up the property among all the children. We need to have an estate. So let's have the eldest son take care of the estate, and the other sons can be supported by the estate. So it switched based on population as well as on ideology.
Okay, and it would seem to me that also it perhaps grew out of the lack of equality in terms of access to actually rising into government. So the scholars, right, that was based on taking the exam so that you could actually go into government, become an authority. That was never co-equal in terms of men and women. It was always men. So therefore, if you have this tradition of men being the scholars, and as issues come up with population, then they're going to lean more towards male.
Exactly. And there is this gender bias within Confucianism. And the thing that I find interesting is Korea fought against that gender bias for a long time. That is to say, they had equal division of property. Sons and daughters were absolutely equal. And if there was a household that had only daughters, for example, Shin Saim-dang, the woman who's featured on the 50,001 note, she was one of 5 sisters. And if she had lived 200 years later, those 5 sisters would have been married off and become what Koreans called chulga wein, a stranger who left the house when she got married. She would have been that. But at the time that she lived, she and her 4 sisters, the 5 of them divided the property into fifths, and they all inherited. So there was a sort of equality, but when I use the word equality in society, yeah, the idea that the men controlled the politics cuts against the absolute equality. But there was economic equality for women. Women functioned in the marketplace. They inherited, they could buy and sell and do things with their own property. They had their own homes in many cases. About half the homes were the house where the women had lived. About half the homes were the house where the man had lived. And so women had equality in that regard. So there were a lot of equal issues, but you're right, politics was in the hands of the men.
Right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
But one more question that I have, which is, you call Confucianism one of the 5 great religions. So first, what are the other 4? And how can you define it as a religion? Where's the
Yes.
deity?
Yeah, yeah. That's the question, isn't it? That's a good question. The other 5 are Buddhism, Christianity, Islam, and Hinduism. World religion texts talk about the 5 great religions, but they also talk about the 7 great religions or the 10 great religions. So you can include more if you want to. I picked the 5 just to emphasize the role of Confucianism as one of the big 5. Confucianism played that role because it was a religion, I say. Now, a lot of Koreans like to say Confucianism is not a religion. And there are non-religious aspects to Confucianism, like there's no God. But there's teachings. There's moral teachings, teaching you how to behave. And one other way to look at this is to use the word belief system. If we didn't say religion, if we said belief system, it opens the definition a little bit. And one way I like to look at this is if you look at Marxism, you look at communist states, they very often say, Marxism is our only box. It's our only belief system. Nothing else can go in the box. You can't have Christians in the box. You can't have Confucians in the box. You can't have Buddhists in the box, because that's all anti-Marxism. So in that regard, Confucianism is a belief system that fits in the same box as Christianity and Buddhism and Hinduism, if it were there, and Islam as well. So no, I think the Confucians would be smarter to say, yes, we are a religion, and to face up to it rather than to shy away from it. And to say, yes, we are a religion gives them the opportunity to say, and this is what we teach, and this is our value added to the society. And it's a different kind of religion. There's no God. And you can be a Confucian and a Christian at the same time. You can be a Confucian and a Buddhist at the same time, although they're contradictory elements, but you can still do that. So that's my take on Confucianism as a religion.
Oh, well, thank you so much. And I hope that those of you who are watching this short video will follow this discussion up among yourselves. And I found it very enlightening. I hope you will too.
I hope it's a good launch pad for your discussion in your classroom.
Thanks.
Thank you.